We think that we're not truly decentralized until you have an open compute network that isn't controlled by any one or small number of entities, and where computers can move freely from one provider to another. And so that's our real mission, is to basically help enable true decentralization all the way down to the infrastructure which the applications are running on.
None of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by WAGMI Ventures or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hey WAGMI family, it's Begit with another WAGMI Ventures podcast episode. Today I'm chatting with Tom Throw. He's the founder and CEO of Fluence Network. Fluence Network is an enterprise-grade deep-in cloudless computing platform that provides a resilient, open, and low-cost alternative to traditional cloud computing. For anyone who is new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders, founders, and investors across crypto and AI. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. All right, I'm going to take it away with Tom here. Hey man, welcome to the show.
Hey, listen, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. We just want to jump right in and start with your crypto journey. How did it all begin?
Listen, sure. It started for me back in 2000, and I think 16 or 17, when I heard of a company called Hedera Hashgraph, where at the time, it was just called Hedera. And I met Mance Harmon and Lehman Baird, who were the two kind of authors of the Hedera white paper, the first one. And I invested in kind of an angel round in the parent company called Swirls. I met them. And then they asked me to come on board and basically help found and launch Hedera, which is the public ledger of Hashgraph, which is a directed acyclic graph, a layer one, effectively a competitor to Ethereum and Solana and others. And so I joined from the very beginning, and basically we all founded the public ledger company Hedera, and built up a governing council, launched the token, and built the whole network. And that has, I think it's been a lot of time coming, but that's recently gotten a lot more press as it's in the top, 15 coins now, especially since the election. So that was my kind of baptism by fire into the crypto space after coming from more of a technology and finance background. But that was my first full-time move into it. And then when I left there in 2019, I joined the Fluence team as a co-founder and have been helping build this deep-in. We were doing it before it was deep-in actually, but deep-in decentralized computing platform ever since.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And how did you stumble upon the idea of Fluence Network and building this project?
Well, the intro was actually, so Evgeny, the two other founders, Evgeny and Dmitry, had actually been building it for a little while before I joined. And one of the investors who had invested in Hedera was also an investor and knew that the Evgeny and Dmitry well, and suggested I join them and thought I'd be a great complement to their team. So they had conceived of and done a lot of the development work towards getting this idea forward. And I joined to basically help launch it, take it forward, and commercialize it.
And how's that been going so far?
It's been going well. I mean, listen, it is, if you take a step back and you think about decentralization, there are three core building blocks you need for decentralization to really work. You need to have payments, and we have that with Bitcoin, Ethereum, name your token, name your smart contract kind of platform of choice. But I think that exists. You need storage, and we've got Filecoin, Arweave, Storage, a bunch of storage providers. So I think that is well in progress. But you also need compute. And for those who don't know, compute is less obvious than the others, but compute is all the work that happens to actually does all the work of the internet. So, if you're looking for moving your Netflix account, like that's compute that's figuring out. If you're trying to call an Uber, that's cloud compute that's actually determining which the closest car is, how much it's going to cost, how long it takes to get to you, et cetera. If you're trying to sequence a genome, if you're running regressions on diseases and symptoms, all of those things require compute. And so that is the part. And even the kind of secret here, the sort of unspoken secret, or a very public secret but unspoken, is that even most of the blockchains require compute. Their nodes are obviously run compute to come up with consensus. And almost all those nodes run in the centralized cloud. And so here we are, very happy to have these decentralized blockchains, but the nodes run in Amazon, Google, or Microsoft and could be cut off by a perceived term of service or of the violation or a number of other reasons. And we think that we're not truly decentralized until you have an open compute network that isn't controlled by any one or small number of entities, and where computers can move freely from one provider to another. And so that's our real mission, is to basically help enable true decentralization all the way down to the infrastructure which the applications are running on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that clarity and background is certainly helpful there. You also talk about decentralized computing. Can you break that down for folks that might be unfamiliar with the concept?
Yeah, sure. So if you think of the default is centralized, you think of on Google, Microsoft, and maybe Ali Cloud and Tencent Cloud. Those companies, they're called the hyperscalers. They're about 80% of the internet. So they're about 80% of kind of the work of the internet goes through those 5 companies, which means if you're running a website, you're doing a lot of compute even off of a website, but just work. Chances are you're using one of those companies most likely. And the problem with that is that it can be expensive. It starts off free, by the way. They give you credits as a startup. So it starts off free, but then ultimately it gets expensive, and it gets even more expensive to leave because they make it difficult to leave. And so because of the business disruption, difficulty in getting data out, et cetera, you're less likely to leave unless you put a lot of time, effort, and resources into it. And so when large companies leave a hyperscaler, it's a big deal. And that's why it doesn't happen so often. You can read a couple of case studies about it. And so that pricing is obviously what enables these businesses to be enormously profitable and continue to scale. And a decentralized compute network says, listen, we don't want to lock anybody in. It's an open network. You, as a customer, can choose any provider that works for you, and then you can leave that provider whenever you want with minimal to no friction and no lock-in. And so what that does is that then reduces or eliminates the ability of any provider to have high pricing, because you can leave quite easily. And so having an open compute network basically ensures that compute is going to be priced very low, because if someone price it high, you can leave quite quickly. And you can leave quickly because someone else offers better service, a better price, or it's in a jurisdiction you like more. There's a whole number of reasons why you may choose a different compute provider. And our objective here is not to take over the cloud. I don't think that's happening in the near term or even medium term, but it is to provide this decentralized alternative, which we know is more cost effective and has a whole number of attributes, given that you're not locked into any one provider. And by the way, we think we have a very good product here, but we're very excited for other companies to offer something similar, because we just think this mission of having scaled decentralized compute is so important to the world that we're just happy to play a part in making it happen.
Yeah, no, and your part is definitely key to changing how we move and innovate in the space and how we move the technology forward. And in that vein, actually, how does Fluence differentiate itself from other decentralized network or cloud solutions?
Well, most of the decentralized compute providers you hear about generally are focused on GPUs, and GPUs are basically the compute that is used to train AI models. And that compute is undergoing a huge demand surge, which I think will probably persist for quite a while. And that's leading to a lot of interest in providers who can access and then provide those GPUs to to startups and other companies that are investing in AI training. That's a great market. We are focused on CPUs, however, and CPU, central processing units, are the computers, the kind of computers that you see all around you, and are the computers that power almost all the applications, almost all the work that goes on in the world. And so GPUs are indispensable for training models like OpenAI, like Grok, et cetera. And that market's only going to grow. But there are 2 billion CPUs that have been sold in the world. They're the ones that are calculating where airline flights are going, running the applications I talked about earlier. So that's where I think a lot of the work, still most of the work on the internet, the vast majority still is accomplished by CPUs. And that's the market that we're focused on right now.
Cool. And in how you focus on these markets, are there any, peer-to-peer computing that come to play in Fluence's ecosystem?
I think the way that we think about that is that, and let me answer it a slightly different way. I think anything decentralized is effectively peer-to-peer. It just depends a little bit on what your definition of that is. And I think calling us decentralized is more appropriate than peer-to-peer, because peer-to-peer sort of means that each machine is talking to each machine. And I think that can work, but that doesn't have to be the case. Certainly doesn't have to be the case for decentralized protocol. And with regard to Fluence, it's not technically the case right now in that we are focused on institutional level compute and compute data centers. And so one of the important things we've done is looked at successful crypto projects, the largest one obviously being Bitcoin, Filecoin being another, and there's other examples there, that realize that as projects scale, the infrastructure inevitably becomes institutionalized. And so Bitcoin went from operating, in people's using their computers in their basements to mine Bitcoin, to publicly traded companies that have purpose-built data centers just to mine Bitcoin. And the same happened with Filecoin. And so for partly that reason, partly because it's just easier to build a reliable system if you're using top quality hardware and resilient professional data centers. And thirdly, because customers are more comfortable if they know the compute is coming out of real, data centers as opposed to people's houses. We have launched with 6 top-tier data centers. They're called Tier 4 data centers. And so those data centers are where our providers are operating their compute from. And so that is, I think, more of the story and more of the reality of it now, is that we're operating in a decentralized network, but using compute that's in corporate enterprise-grade data centers that makes the technology a little bit easier for us. And as importantly, the perception of the resilience and reliability of that technology far more robust. And so we have an easier time in talking to clients about it. When we can show them, for example, that compute's operating out of the Switch data center outside of Las Vegas, which hosts some of the top Web 2 companies.
Hey, everybody. Quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Let's get back to the show. Wow, this is all really interesting. And thank you for clearing that node on peer-to-peer versus decentralized. I think that helps to give us a better picture of who Fluence is and how it positions itself. I'm going to move more towards just focusing on the project itself. I know you guys have your own programming language, Aqua. It'd be good to hear or get in your words what Aqua is, how it works, and why it's essential for building decentralized applications.
Sure. So I guess the important thing about Aqua is that this is a language that we developed, which is which greatly simplifies the building of decentralized applications. And so it basically abstracts out all of the complexity of an application that's decentralized. So if you want to build a decentralized app, you then need to figure out a whole bunch of things about what happens if a peer fails, if a node fails, a compute center fails, how do you fail over to the next one? There's a whole list of attributes that need to be programmed that are just the back end of a decentralized application. And Aqua basically takes care of all of that for you, greatly simplifying that process. Now, all that being said, we have de-emphasized Aqua right now. We've gotten it to a place where it's pretty much ready to launch, but doing so, we need to focus on a particular customer segment. And so we have decided to focus on just the compute platform now, and basically to penetrate several customer verticals first, and then figure out where Aqua is most likely to have the highest value, and then to build the appropriate tooling so that we can deploy it in that vertical. Because while Aqua is a terrific standalone language, it still requires an investment in kind of middleware, if you will, of code in order to make it particularly applicable to one of or a couple of use cases. And so we paused the development on that while we move forward with our kind of first customer segment for the compute platform.
Awesome. How are folks, or developers, I should say, how have their response been to Fluence? Are you seeing a lot of folks building with Aqua?
Well, so to the point that we've emphasized it, our first customer segment are decentralized, or not decentralized, are basically third-party node providers. And so these are companies that run nodes in some of the larger blockchain networks for customers. And so this gets back to my earlier point about most blockchains running in the centralized cloud. And so these third-party node providers run thousands of nodes across the industry. And we have a pipeline of $5 million worth of business from these providers who are looking to save between 20 and 75% of their cloud bill by switching their compute to Fluence. And so those customers are starting to come online this week, and we hope to close a lot of that pipeline this year.
Wow, that's a pretty significant difference in savings. Are there any applications or use cases that you're excited about or coming down the pipeline?
Well, I mean, that third-party node provider is exactly the use case that is current. So that's the most important one. Our objective now is to basically get that as advanced as we can, close those deals, build that pipeline. And once we have that working very well, we move on to the next kind of customer segment. But that could be, I don't know, $10 million worth of reoccurring revenue, I hope, and grow from there. And once that's secured, we will no doubt have built a much larger pipeline in another sector. And there's a couple others we're evaluating, but we want to focus on closing these customers first.
Gotcha. And as you develop and today, like, what have been some of the biggest technical or strategic challenges you've faced since launch?
I think just building software is difficult. It just takes time and effort, and it always takes longer than you think it will. It's always more complicated than you think it is. There's always another bug that you don't expect. So I think that's true for anyone who's built any type of complex software. So that's obviously one thing. That's nothing unique. The other thing, obviously, I think that is particularly important is that, customers are what makes this work and makes any business work. And I think a lot of crypto has been built around building cool technology and investing in a variety of metrics that do not necessarily include revenue. And so I think we're sort of moving past the stage where Twitter followers, Telegram channel size, obviously we're past the TPS size and TPS numbers, et cetera. So I think we're moving past those metrics with investors looking more and more at revenue. and to see what projects are actually gaining traction. And I think that business development is going to be the key strength, the key focus, and the key differentiator between successful projects and those that are not over the kind of the next cycle.
Got it. And in thinking of that cycle, how do you see decentralized computing evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And how does Fluence fit into that future?
Well, listen, I think that DePIN overall is going to have a significant share of the market going forward. I think that only is going to continue to grow. I think people, when we back up, when I started raising money for Fluence back in 2019, you really couldn't say you were competing with Amazon or the cloud. People would just have no interest in talking to you. Now the market has really moved to us where people are excited. Customers are excited about an alternative to cloud. Investors understand there needs to be an alternative to the cloud. Everybody gets it. And so we've just seen the market move there. And I think that will continue to move with customers in particular more and more interested in leaving the centralized cloud. And then there's a whole kind of complaint jar, if you will, of issues that people have. So if you can give them a solution which is cheaper and as performant, and the user interface isn't terrible, I think, and the usability isn't terrible, you will get traction. And so I'm very excited for the future of decentralized compute, also because the market is so vast. And so when we like to say that Amazon has, not Amazon, but the centralized cloud, the hyperscalers have 500 to 600 data centers. If Fluence got to the level of just having one of those data centers, in other words, we had demand for compute enough to fill one data center, which is about 50,000 CPUs, we would be a huge success. And that is, like 1/6 of 1% of what that cloud is. We don't need to beat the cloud, but and by the way, that number of how big the cloud is growing at some huge number, 20% a year or some vast number. And so there's no better place than to be in a huge market that's growing quickly, that has a whole large number of unhappy customers. That's where you want to be. So I think it's just up to us and people like us to build a product that meets the interests of those customers. And then we and others can be enormous successes.
Yeah, now I think as you look at that future out, DePIN certainly is the underlying structure there. And with a lot of tailwind in the way the industry is moving, you certainly see that the folks are catching up to the more innovation that is coming into the space and how it's being used. Because certainly folks like yourself and how you build and bring about that economic savings is definitely very attractive for developers and builders in the space, and is a no-brainer in the adoption of the tech. As I also think about what that looks like 5 to 10 years out, I also think about concerns around data privacy and centralizations in some ways. How does Fluence ensure security and trust within its network today, and what does the future state of that look like?
Well, I think that it's an important question, and I think there's security and there's privacy, and those are slightly different things. What I guess I would say is that with regard to security and privacy, the centralized clouds do that by trust. And so you have a legal agreement, and then you also trust, based on their reputations, that they're not going to misuse your information and they will keep it private. And that's largely sufficient. I think with Fluence, you have that ability as well, because you can trust the provider that you've chosen to use on the Fluence platform. There also are crypto economic incentives to not breach any of the agreements you have, because should you not perform the compute appropriately, should something happen that jeopardizes your data or the security of your data, the stake, the economic kind of value associated that provider has basically tied up would be slashed. And so they would suffer a financial penalty for not doing what they said they were going to do. And so you have the economic kind of incentive that helps provide the alignment with customers, which is important. And then there is a further point, which is called a trusted execution environment, TEE. And this is basically a kind of a chip that allows compute to be private within the computer that's on somebody else's system. So you can effectively run compute in someone else's computer in, say, another company's data center in their computer. And because of this TE technology, they can't access that compute. And so that is another way that we ensure, or we haven't implemented that yet, I'm sorry, but that is coming shortly. That is how we can ensure privacy. And I say that we haven't developed that yet or haven't implemented it yet. Others in the decentralized compute space have implemented that. And so it's not like that's a technical challenge which hasn't been figured out. It's been figured out, it's been deployed. It's just a question of time until we do it. And so I think those are the key ways to accomplish the privacy and security.
Now, I really appreciate you sharing like how you guys are approaching it and how you're thinking about it. I think it continues to be one of the most fundamental concerns or areas that innovators like yourself continue to address. And so just, getting a window into how you guys are doing it today and what the future state is certainly very helpful. I just want to get a sense also of outside of decentralized and cloud computing here, what else in crypto excites you and where do you think this technology is going, I don't know, in a few years from now?
Well, listen, I'm excited by Bitcoin for sure. I think you're a little unusual in this if you're in the space and don't appreciate and like Bitcoin. So I hope that should be a pretty typical thing to say, but I think Bitcoin is going to do enormously well. I think we're going to see a whole bunch. I think we're going to move very soon to see state adoption of Bitcoin reserves. We've already seen it, frankly. It's just that penny hasn't really dropped, but at least there's 3 states, I believe, what is it? El Salvador, I think Bhutan, and I think either UAE or Saudi, I believe there's Kuwait. One of those has Bitcoin reserves, making at least 3 publicly disclosed states that hold Bitcoin. The U.S. sounds like the U.S. is going to be announcing that shortly as well, and I think many others will. So I think that is a shockingly important move from where we were, I don't know, a year or 2 ago when people were not sure it was going to even survive, given the attacks that were being either discussed or levied on it from other kind of states. So I think that's just a fascinating turnaround. I think we're going to see huge moves in Bitcoin. And then with regard to crypto, I think the DePIN space, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, are going to be huge. I'm excited about Fluence. I'm excited about a whole number of projects in the space that are using kind of networks of hardware that are incented by crypto economics and secured by that to offer better services than centralized competitors. There's Demo doing cars, there's Spexy doing drone mapping, you've got Wingbits doing flight tracking, there's just people doing decentralized car charging. There's a whole wide number of projects out there. And if you're curious, GeoNet is doing basically a 1 centimeter specific or precise location. It would be an RTK network. So I have a podcast. Actually, my podcast is the DePINed podcast, DEPINED, focused just on DePIN projects. And so I think that is going to be very interesting over the next couple of years. And obviously, the last area that's huge is going to be, RWA's real world assets, which basically means tokenization of everything financial and even some things that are not financial. I just think that is going to take longer to implement, but ultimately will be the biggest thing, I think, in crypto for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today. This has been really insightful. And we look forward to how the rest of the project unfolds and really disrupt this space and become one of the largest cloud options out there away from our traditional folks. And we'll continue to cheer you on. Thank you so much.
Listen, appreciate it. We're looking forward to a cloudless future. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And take care.
Thanks.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations from the most interesting founders, builders, and investors from across the world. Thanks so much and have a good one.